Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all out here. While we look out at this beautiful ocean surrounded by mountains. Aklama Cloy-e-iis, Hupacasath Nuu-chah-nulth. My traditional name is Cloy-e-iis. I come from the Hupacasath peoples of the larger Nuu-chah-nulth nations, which is located on the west coast of Vancouver Island. One of the most beautiful places, I think, on earth. Of course, I have a lot of bias. I'd like to acknowledge that today we are on the ancestral and territorial lands of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam peoples, and thank them again for that opportunity. And thank you to those that have organized this impressive conference and for the Government of Canada hosting this. I don't think I've ever been able to spend 7 days talking about the oceans and the fish, and for that I am grateful, because it is an integral part of the Nuu-chah-nulth people. The ocean is our lifeline. It is what we depend upon. We are ocean people. You know, we can't talk about where we are or where we want to go without talking a little bit about where we came from. I don't think this is, everything is different here. I think I went all the way around and it wasn't the right one, sorry. You know, as Nuu-chah-nulth people, we have 14 nations. And our nations, traditionally, we lived under the law of our Hatwia, our hereditary chiefs. The lands, the waters, the oceans, the resources was theirs. It was their responsibility to live up to those laws, to make sure that there was enough resources in the community for all the people. Being a Hatwia is a big job and a big responsibility. But you know, before the white man arrived in these lands, we were a rich people. We were rich in fish and deer, in so many sea resources. It was our staples, it was our life. There was so much. You know how they talk about you can walk across the river on the backs of the salmon? I've done that. Even in my lifetime, I was able to do that. We lived in a world of abundability, where we had enough of everything. And why did we have so much? We also lived under the laws, protocols, traditions of our Hatwia, ensuring that we lived up to the laws. You never took the first school of fish going up. They were the leaders. You take away the leaders, the rest of the fish don't know where to go. You didn't take more than you needed. There was no word in our language for conservation, for sustainability, because we didn't need those words. We didn't need to conserve. We didn't need to be sustainable, because that was how we lived. The closest word that we have to have anything to do with that is He-shook-ish Sawak. Everything is one, everything is connected. Whatever happens in this area of the Pacific is going to be affecting the other areas of the Pacific. If we destroy the runs of our Chinook that come from Alaska and down, and they come and spawn in the territory I come from, we're all going to live with that. So as Nuu-chah-nulth people, and today I'm coming to you from a local place. It was great to hear about what's happening in the world, globally, because now we know how we can hold Canada's feet to the fire. We learn all these things. Because for us, it is up to us to be protecting our oceans, our resources. You know, through colonization, we were pushed out of any of the sea resources, fisheries. We used to always be out on the oceans, seeking our food, whaling, fishing, everything, freely. Through colonization, we were given licenses, we were given quotas. Some of our fishermen had licenses commercially to go fish. But you know, who was it that fed all those boats that came from different countries? Who was it that gave them fish when they arrived, traded? Our first commercial interactions, I guess, was our people meeting the boats, giving them fish. We were always a part, an integral part of the ocean. It was yesterday we announced that we're starting the legal process to establish a marine protected area off of the coast. What are we looking? Off of the coast here, large area, includes Nuu-chah-nulth territory, Haida territory, Quatsino, Pacheedaht, and the Government of Canada. And it's a tool, a mechanism that we can use to help protect our oceans. We used to be way out in the deep sea. We know the names of the seamounts. We know the tides. We know so much. And that's what we bring to the table when we come and partner with the Government of Canada. That's what we can bring into this global blue economy that was just described to us in the Blue Strategy, is our knowledge of the oceans. We have a book in our language where we name every tide, every stream, and every wind possible, because that is how well our people know our oceans. I talked a little bit about the abundance of fish that we once enjoyed. There was so much. And then we had less and less and less, because we were subject to allocations that the federal government had for us. I remember at the negotiating table being told by federal negotiators, oh, well, you only eat one fish per month, or something silly, when we would live on fish every day if we possibly could. The resources that we get from the ocean, the herring roe, the crab, the prawn, all of that made us healthy, made us very healthy. You know, today a large percentage of our people have diabetes because we can't eat that kind of food anymore. We don't have access to it. It's become a treat to our elders. I remember we had a naming feast not long ago, and we had some seal, and some of the elders were just delighted with the seal fat and the seal meat because they hadn't had some in so long. We need to get back to that place. I remember the first time I ever heard the term blue economy, we were on a Zoom call with the Minister of Fisheries, and I said, what is a blue economy? And so she explained to me it was the economy that you get from the ocean. And for me, my first thought was, you can't have a blue economy unless you have respected the rights of Indigenous people, unless you have our involvement and consent. In Canada, we have evolved very far in pushing our rights, not far enough. 5 of our nations had to go all the way to the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court of Canada, to prove they had a commercial right to the fishery. It was incumbent upon the Indigenous people to prove that. It wasn't up to Canada to prove that they had a right to the fish. It was up to us. And even still, the government of Canada is deciding what's a reasonable livelihood from that. The Nuu-chah-nulth people are always willing to share. They realize the importance of the economy from the ocean, from everybody. But number one is conservation. We have to ensure that there is enough of our sea resources going forward. And by doing that, we must have high environmental standards, and we must be able to protect what's out there. We've seen so many things happening within our territories and that we fight against. The Trans Mountain Pipeline, bringing oil across the country, putting it on barges and different vessels here in the Burrard Inlet, was opposed to by the 3 nations that are in this inlet. Went to court. Unfortunately, they lost. Because we know, we've seen the devastation of oil spills in our waters. We've seen how many years it takes to reestablish, restore, and rehabilitate those waters that never really go back to where they were. Abundability is where we want to go. But right now, we have to talk conservation. We have to talk about how are we going to change things. The Fraser River salmon are on the brink of collapse. So many of our fisheries, we cannot take much because we take a small portion and then they give some to the recreation and they give some to the commercial. It's a system that we don't have a lot of say in. And as Indigenous people, we need to be restored to that. Canada has adopted a piece of legislation called the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. They need to align all their laws and policies in the keeping of UNDRIP. And I'm hoping all of you have at least read that or knows a summary of it. But UNDRIP, which is just a declaration, but it talks about the rights of Indigenous people to our territories, to our lands, to our resources, the right to own, manage, and use, the right to control our own development, the right to self-determination. We play a large role in our lands, in our territories, and we've been fighting with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to be able to expand our role in the fishery, to be joint managers. So in the coastal First Nations, and we talked about these new marine protected areas, we will have a role in co-management, and it's a start. But we have a long ways to go because there is so much at stake. Sorry, I saw my PowerPoint come up. Don't know what happened there. Lost my train of thought. As we go forward into the future, into this blue economy, we have increased our role, our presence on the water. In Nuu-chah-nulth, we have some processing plants. We have people entering new industries in seaweed. We have new industries looking at various ways of processing our fish. We have a wonderful way of cooking our fish, drying our fish, that isn't accepted by Health Canada. We do it in our smokehouses, we do it with cedar sticks, and so that's not considered health regulations. So we've been trying to find ways to become a part of the blue economy because it always was a part of our life. How do we continue to use our traditional knowledge? We've tried the stainless steel things to hang our fish. It's not quite the same as hanging it on cedar. We've had First Nations actually farming abalone, because abalone was a big part of our diet, and now it's a red listed species. And so they were growing this abalone, and the federal government told them, we're sorry, you can't sell that, because it's a red listed species, even though they were growing the abalone for sale. Lots of barriers to First Nations becoming a large part of the territory of the blue economy, to make our revenues and to do what we need to do. We certainly need capacity building. Once you could go into any First Nations community on the coast and there'd be commercial vessels everywhere. Today, if they're there, they're derelict, just resting on the sand, and it's sad. It's sad that we have come to that point. And so revival of our economic base that's in line with our traditions, with the laws of our Hatwea, is something we strive for, something that we really need to do. Because we respect the ocean, we respect our role as stewards of the ocean, and we know that if we don't rise now, if we don't raise our voices now, then we are not going to have a future in the sea. And I think it's as dire as our previous speaker talked about in many cases, that it is going to take a world effort to be saving our oceans. Trying to think of all the points in my PowerPoint. I'll make sure I've covered them all. Our stories, our legends, our way of life is at stake. So many of our nations are putting in place marine plans, protected areas. We are pursuing Indigenous marine protected areas, something that we can do ourselves, that we can put in place without having to go through a lot of regulations and regulatory processes that the Canadian government has to go to. We are looking at building our capacity. We've lost things. Remember I told you we had so many fishermen? And always those fishermen took their children and taught them how to be on the water, how to do the fishing. We've lost that because we haven't had people out there. So we have been working on training young people back on the ocean, back in fishing, so that we won't lose our ties to the ocean. We need those capacity dollars. We need to be able to buy the boats. We need to be able to train our people. There is a huge amount of work in capacity building and that we are working on here within British Columbia with the First Nation Fisheries Council, at our tribal council in our fisheries. We are training people as much as we can, but we certainly need a lot more capacity building. Partnering with other seafood processors has been one of the successful tools. Bringing in commercial buyers. We have a sales fish on our river in in Port Alberni. There's 2 nations that fish there, and we're allowed to sell our fish. And the buyers just come in and buy our fish, and they basically offer you whatever you want. Trying to make a successful business out of that has been difficult, so that we can go to market and have those kinds of prices that everybody else is getting for their fishery. We have been working with commercial groups and recreation groups, trying to reach out to them to talk about how much we value the ocean, how much we value the resource, and is there a way we can work together. And a couple of areas, we actually bring everybody together and we decide on the allocations that are between each sector. So I think that there is a new understanding as we have the opportunity to work more and more with people in the economy, recognizing our place, that we bring a large amount of money into the economy. We have 14 nations, and when you're buying boats and you're buying nets and you're buying ice and all of those kinds of things, you become an important part of the economy, and people didn't realize that at first. But I think more and more and more people are reaching out to us to try and work with us. And I was wanting to respect the conservation. There have been times when we've wanted DFO to close down the herring because we just felt the herring are being fished out. And we work with them every year to make sure the herring fishery stays closed due to conservation concerns. We've had protests, we've had other things in order to stop that fishery from happening. But it's on a year-by-year basis, and we know how long it takes to restore herring stocks. And so we've been trying to use our traditional knowledge and work with DFO scientists to prove when there is conservation, because it's never up to us to decide when there's a conservation need. And like I said, if we're not going to have these healthy stocks and runs, then we are not going to have a blue economy. And I think that would be very tragic. You know, when the runs aren't what they used to be, the commercial fishermen suffer, and we know that. We've gone to the courts many, many times about our fisheries, and one of the basic cases was a sparrow case that talked about our rights as Indigenous people are second only to conservation. And now we have the court case that said our commercial right is an Aboriginal right, and therefore our commercial fishery is second only to conservation as well. So we do have a place in the blue economy, but we will do it very carefully. We will do it with the consent of our Hawaiian. We will do it in keeping with our principles. In my community, we have a story about this large bird that was within our territory, and every hunter wanted to kill this large bird because it would show their prowess as the best hunter. One day, 2 of our hunters managed to corner that bird, and the bird spoke to them and said, "Please do not kill me. I have much work to do." And the hunters were very surprised because they had never heard a bird speak. And so they talked amongst themselves and they said to the bird, "Can you would you promise us that we will have fish in our river all the time for our people?" And the bird told them, "Yes, I can promise you that. You will always have fish in your river for your people to eat." The Somas River has 5 different kinds of salmon. And every year we have had fish. Some years it's pretty small, but other years it's awesome. I had a picture on one of my slides of boatfuls of salmon. I think you can see it there. Or I can see it on this screen. I guess you can't see it. We used to do this community drag seine where we throw out a net and we bring in fish. And we come home with boatfuls of fish. I come home on a Saturday with 300 fish from my freezer. Again, that's where we want to be. We want to ensure that every one of our families have enough sea resources to last them for the year, that they have the health that they need, that we can move away from the diabetes and the different kinds of health issues that we now have in our communities. We want to ensure that we can rely on the ocean like everyone else to have an economy. But we too are going to be speaking out about conservation. And I don't think that the amount of ocean that we're going to be setting aside for marine protected areas is enough. Many of our sea resources travel through those marine protected areas, and it's great. But until we actually can have the higher standards, then we're not going to be able to do that. In Canada, these multitude of cruise ships we get through can dump in our waters. I think it's 10 miles out. All kinds of horrible stuff can get dumped into our waters. The US does not allow it. Alaska doesn't allow it. So the cruise ships wait till they get to the BC waters and dump. We've had some improvements because we've been raising our voices about that. But again, Hupacasath, everything is connected, everything is one. Lots of fish that go to the US and other places, whales, go through those waters. And if we're getting waste dumped into our waters, it's going to affect all the fishery. So there are so many things that are affecting the blue economy. We want to protect it, but more importantly, we want to protect our resources. Climate change has had a huge effect on our waters. We see it all the time. What are we doing in our communities to help the global? Small pieces of the picture that affect the whole. And I think when we heard the plea from the previous speaker, that's what she was asking as our commitment, because every one of us have a role to play in the future of our oceans. I know it's something that we teach our children, our grandchildren, and that we will continue to raise and play our part globally, federally, provincially, and locally in doing what we need to do to go back to the laws of abundability. Can you imagine living in a world where we have so much that we don't need to worry other than careful living? That's where we want to be back to. So I talked about where we were and where we want to go, and go back to where we started, because that's how we want to live as Nuu-chah-nulth people in our territories. I thank you for your time.